This is Mystery Port Chronicles. I am Nathaniel Aldridge, a man who watches, listens, and writes down the truth. Here in the fog and lamplight of the harbor, every detail speaks. Evelyn Hart records the case files. I follow the clues. And together, we bring light to places built on shadows. Let us begin.
There are sounds that wake a harbor town with dread. The crash of wood against rock is one of them. The silence that follows is worse. It was 3:47 in the morning when the Northern Promise struck the reef. I know the time because my pocket watch stopped when the impact shook my window. A coincidence, perhaps, but one that felt like an omen. By the time Evelyn and I reached the cliffs, dawn was bleeding gray across the water, and the wreckage lay scattered like broken teeth along the shoreline. The ship had split nearly in half. Cargo spilled into the tide. Bodies were being pulled from the foam. But what struck me most was the lighthouse. It stood tall and untouched, its beams still turning faithfully through the mist. "The light was on," Evelyn murmured, notebook already open despite the wind. "So why did they crash?" A harbor official approached us, his face pale with exhaustion. "Mr. Aldridge, thank God you're here. This isn't just a shipwreck." "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the rocks. "We've recovered 3 bodies so far. 2 sailors and 1 man who wasn't on the ship's manifest. And the lighthouse keeper?" The official's jaw tightened. "James Thornwick? He's gone. Vanished the same night the ship went down." Evelyn wrote quickly. "A lighthouse keeper who disappears, a ship that crashes despite the light, a body that shouldn't exist." She looked at me. "Where do we start?" I turned toward the lighthouse, its white tower stark against the storm-gray sky. We start where the light failed. The lighthouse keeper's quarters were small but meticulously kept. Everything had its place, except the keeper himself. The logbook lay open on the desk. The last entry dated the night of the wreck. 11:47 p.m. All clear. Light functioning. Wind from the northwest. Sea rough but manageable. The handwriting was steady. No sign of panic. No indication of what came next. I examined the room carefully. The bed was made. The coat hung by the door. A half-finished cup of tea sat cold on the sill. He left in a hurry, but not violently. No signs of struggle, I agreed. He walked out of his own accord, or was convinced to. I moved to the window overlooking the sea. From here, Thornwick would have seen the Northern Promise approaching, would have watched it steer too close to the reef, would have known what was about to happen. A small brass telescope stood mounted by the window. I peered through it, adjusting the focus toward the crash site. And then I saw it, scratched faintly into the wooden frame beside the lens. "Forgive me." Captain Morris survived the wreck with a broken arm and seawater still rattling in his lungs. We found him in the port's medical station, bandaged and bitter. "The light was on," he said before we even asked. "I saw it clear as anything. We should never have struck those rocks." "Then why did you?" I asked. His face darkened. "Because the light was in the wrong place." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" "The beam," Morris said hoarsely. "It was angled wrong. It pulled us toward the reef instead of away from it." I felt the pieces shift. You're saying the lighthouse was deliberately misaligned. I'm saying someone wanted us on those rocks, Mr. Aldridge. He leaned forward, his good hand gripping the edge of the cot. And I'll tell you something else. We weren't carrying legal cargo. Evelyn's pen paused. What was on board? Morris hesitated. Silk, French wine, things that bypass the tariff laws. Smuggled goods. He nodded. We've done it a dozen times. Same route, same lighthouse, same keeper. I exchanged a glance with Evelyn. Are you saying Thornwick was part of your operation? I'm saying he looked the other way when we needed him to. Morris coughed, wincing. But this time, something went wrong.
Mrs. Thornwick, we need to ask you about your husband.
Margaret Thornwick lived in a small cottage half a mile from the lighthouse, close enough to see the beam each night, far enough to never visit. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and hands that never stopped moving. When we arrived, she was burning letters in the hearth. "Mrs. Thornwick," I said gently, "we need to ask you about your husband." She didn't look up. "He's gone." "Do you know where?" "No." "Do you know why?" Finally, she met my gaze. "Because he was a coward." The word hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn stepped forward carefully. "Mrs. Thornwick, what was James afraid of?" Margaret's hands stilled. "He owed money, a lot of it, to people who don't forgive debts." "Who?" "A man named Garrett Hull. Runs a business along the coast." "Smuggling," I said. She nodded. "He was supposed to help them, signal ships, look the other way. But something changed. He got scared." "Of what?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He said they were bringing something darker than silk, something that would cost more than money." She turned back to the fire. "And now, he's run, left me to face whatever's coming." The third body recovered from the wreck lay in the port morgue, unclaimed and unidentified. He was a man in his 30s, well-dressed despite the seawater damage. No papers, no belongings, just a single tattoo on his left forearm, a compass rose with a broken needle. The coroner, a precise man named Dr. Finch, gestured to the body. "Drowned like the others, but look at this." He indicated bruising along the man's ribs and neck. He was in a fight before he went into the water. I examined the marks closely. "Recent?" "Within hours of death." Evelyn leaned in. "Do we know who he was?" "Not yet," Finch said. "But he wasn't crew. His hands are too soft, and his clothing, expensive, custom-tailored." I studied the tattoo again. A compass with a broken needle. A man without direction, or a man who had lost his way. "Dr. Finch," I said, "check for anything in his stomach contents, anything unusual." He nodded and began the examination. Minutes later, he looked up, puzzled. "There's something here, small, metal." He extracted it carefully, rinsing it clean. A signet ring, engraved with initials H.G. Garrett Hull. The coast caves were a labyrinth of stone and shadow, carved by centuries of tide and secrecy. This was where Hull operated. Evelyn and I descended carefully, lanterns casting long shapes against the wet walls. The air smelled of salt, rot, and something sharper, tobacco and foreign spices. We found the cache in the third chamber, crates stacked high, stamped with false merchant marks. But it wasn't silk or wine. It was opium, crate after crate of it. "This is what Thornwick was afraid of," Evelyn whispered. "This is what got him killed," I replied. Footsteps echoed behind us. We turned. A man emerged from the shadows, tall, weathered, with eyes like chips of ice. Garrett Hall. "Mr. Aldridge," he said calmly, "I wondered when you'd find your way here. Where's James Thornwick?" Hull smiled without warmth. "That depends. Is he alive or dead when you're asking? You tell me." Hull stepped closer. "James was useful for a time, but he developed a conscience. He refused to help you. He threatened to expose me," Hull corrected, "so I gave him a choice: disappear or drown with the rest of them." Evelyn's voice was steady. "And the unidentified body, the man with your ring?" Hull's expression flickered. "That was a complication." The man in the morgue wasn't random. His name was Thomas Hull, Garrett's younger brother. According to the records we uncovered, Thomas had been trying to leave the smuggling business for months. He wanted out, wanted a clean life. Garrett refused to let him go. The night of the wreck, Thomas was on board the Northern Promise, not as crew, but as cargo. He was being smuggled out of the country by Captain Morris, paid in secret by someone who wanted him safe. That someone was James Thornwick. Evelyn pieced it together as we sat in the keeper's quarters, the logbook open before us. "Thornwick wasn't running from Hull," she said. "He was trying to save Thomas." "And Hull found out," I added. "So Hull sabotaged the ship, made sure it crashed, killing his own brother to keep him from escaping." The cruelty of it settled between us like fog. But there was still one question. "Where is Thornwick now?" Evelyn asked. I looked toward the cliffs. "There's only one place left to check."
Beneath the lighthouse, carved into the rock by wind and wave, was a narrow cave accessible only at low tide. We waited until the water receded, then descended. Inside, the air was cold and still, and there, huddled against the stone, wrapped in a tattered coat, was James Thornwick, alive. Barely. He looked up as our lanterns found him, his face gaunt and hollow. "I thought you'd be Hull," he rasped. I knelt beside him. "We're not Hull. We're here to help." Tears streaked his weathered face. "I tried to save him, Thomas. He was a good man, wanted to leave all this behind." "We know," Evelyn said gently. "But Garrett, he found out, tilted the light, sent the ship into the rocks." His voice broke. "I heard Thomas scream, heard the ship break apart, and I ran. God help me, I ran." "You're not a coward, Mr. Thornwick," I said. "You tried to do the right thing." "And failed." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "You're alive, and now you can testify." Thornwick looked at her with hollow hope. "Will they believe me?" "They will, because we have the evidence." We brought Thornwick to the harbor at first light, where the authorities and a small crowd had gathered. Garrett Hull was already there, flanked by hired men, his expression smug. James Thornwick, he called out. The man who abandoned his post, who let a ship crash and men die. Thornwick flinched, but I stepped forward. James Thornwick is not the criminal here, Mr. Hull. You are. Hull's smile didn't waver. Bold words. Can you prove them? Yes. I held up the signet ring. This belonged to your brother Thomas. We found it in his stomach, swallowed before he drowned, likely to hide it from you. Hull's expression darkened. We also have Captain Morris's testimony, Evelyn added. He'll confirm the smuggling operation, the opium, your control over the route. And, I continued, we have the Lighthouse logbook. Thornwick recorded every signal, every manipulation you forced him to make. The crowd murmured. Hull's men shifted uneasily. You killed your own brother to silence him, and you tried to frame Thornwick for it. For a moment, Hull stood frozen. Then he lunged, not at me, but toward Thornwick. He didn't make it 3 steps before the constables tackled him to the ground.
The harbor had never looked so clean. Morning sun broke through the last of the fog, washing the docks in pale gold, the kind of light that feels like redemption. Here's what followed. James Thornwick, cleared of all charges, offered a position at a lighthouse further north, away from the shadows of the past. Garrett Hull, arrested for murder, smuggling, and conspiracy, awaiting trial with no chance of bail. Captain Morris gave full testimony against Hull, facing reduced charges for cooperation. Thomas Hull, given a proper burial with his name restored. On the cliff overlooking the sea, Evelyn closed her notebook. Another case finished, she said softly. I watched the lighthouse beam turn, steady and true once more. No, I replied, another truth brought to light. The harbor has many more waiting. She smiled, that warm, steady smile she reserves for moments when justice feels fragile but real. Then I'll keep writing, and I'll keep watching. As we walked back toward our small office near the docks, Evelyn penned the final line. Case file 002, resolved. But in the fog of mystery port, another lantern always waits to be lit.